Nobody tells you the moment it happens. There is no dramatic scene, no lesson anyone sits you down for. It happens quietly, invisibly, in the spaces between ordinary moments. The way your mother's voice changed when she opened a bill. The silence at the dinner table after your father said they'd talk about it later. The feeling in your chest when you asked for something at the store and the answer was, "Not now." You didn't understand any of it back then. You were just a child, absorbing the room. But your brain, which was doing exactly what it was built to do, was building something from those moments. Not a memory you can point to, something far more permanent than that. It was building a set of instructions about what money means, how safe the world is, and what kind of person you are allowed to become. And here is what nobody in the personal finance industry will ever tell you. Those instructions are probably still running right now, today, in the way you hesitated before sending that invoice, in the strange guilt you feel when you spend money on yourself, in the invisible ceiling that seems to stop you every time you get close to a certain level of income or success. You didn't create those patterns as an adult, you inherited them as a child. And until you understand where they came from, no budget, no savings plan, and no motivational video about financial freedom will be enough to change them. The brain doesn't store money lessons, it stores survival signals. Here is the uncomfortable truth that most financial advice completely ignores. The way you handle money today is not primarily a reflection of your discipline, your intelligence, or your work ethic. In most cases, it is a direct reflection of what your nervous system learned to believe about safety before you were 10 years old. Not what someone consciously taught you, what you absorbed. From the emotional atmosphere of your home, from the patterns you watched play out between the adults around you, from the conclusions your developing brain drew in order to make sense of a world it was only beginning to understand. During childhood, the brain is not building a philosophy, it is doing something far more urgent. It is scanning the environment for signals about danger, scarcity, and survival. And in most households, money is one of the most emotionally loaded signals a child encounters. When there is not enough of it, a specific kind of tension fills the air that children feel long before they can name it. When adults argue about it, the child's nervous system does not register a disagreement about finances. It registers something closer to, "The ground beneath me is not stable. I need to adapt." That adaptation becomes a strategy, and that strategy, because it was formed so early and so deeply, follows you into adulthood disguised as personality. Research in childhood development and interpersonal neurobiology has shown that emotional memories formed in the early years of life are stored differently than adult memories. They are not stored as narratives you can access, examine, and consciously revise. They are stored as automatic responses.
Reflexes. Patterns of behavior that activate before your rational mind has a chance to weigh in. This is why you can understand compound interest perfectly, read every personal finance book ever published, and still find yourself making financial decisions that contradict everything you know you should do. The problem is not information. The problem is that a much older, much deeper part of your brain is running a program it built when you were a child, and it is entirely convinced that program is keeping you alive. The 3 belief systems that form before you can question them. Psychology and behavioral economics research consistently identify 3 dominant patterns of money belief that form in childhood. Almost everyone carries some version of one of them, and most people have never identified which one is theirs. The first forms in homes where money was unpredictable, consistently absent, or treated as something that was always about to run out. If you grew up hearing some version of, "We can't afford that," often enough that it stopped sounding like a sentence and started sounding like a permanent condition of your existence, your brain absorbed something very specific. Scarcity is the natural state of things. As an adult, this belief shows up in ways that have nothing to do with your actual income. You check your account not out of responsibility, but out of a kind of low-grade fear that never fully leaves. You may underprice your work, avoid negotiating, or feel a deep and almost physical discomfort at the idea of spending money on yourself. What looks like irrationality from the outside is, from the inside, a perfectly logical response to what your brain learned the world is like. The problem is that the world you live in now is not the same world that created that response. The second pattern forms when money in the home was consistently tied to tension, argument, or the shifting of power between adults. When financial stress and emotional instability were so intertwined that a child could not experience one without feeling the other. Adults who grew up inside this dynamic often develop a complicated and largely unconscious relationship with financial success itself. Some find that every time they begin to move forward financially, something happens that pulls them back, not through bad luck, but through their own decisions, made in ways they rarely recognize in the moment. Others avoid financial conversations in their relationships entirely, not because they don't care, but because somewhere in the nervous system, talking about money still carries the emotional memory of what happened when the adults in their life did the same. The third pattern is perhaps the least obvious, but in many ways the most corrosive. It forms when financial status was used, consciously or not, as a measure of human worth. Either because the family had money and that status was a source of identity that had to be constantly protected, or because they didn't, and the absence of it carried a quiet but persistent undertone of shame. In both cases, the child absorbs the same core equation. What you have determines who you are. The adult who carries this belief does not just experience financial stress as inconvenient, they experience it as a verdict on their value as a person. When money is good, they feel whole. When money is tight, they don't just feel pressured, they feel in some deep and wordless way like a lesser version of themselves. And that connection, because it lives so far below the level of conscious thought, makes it nearly impossible to make financial decisions from a clear and rational place, because every choice feels like a statement about identity.
The moment that changes everything. Most content that touches this territory stops here. It names the pattern, traces it back to childhood, and then offers something like, "Be aware of your money beliefs." As if awareness alone could undo years of automatic programming. But awareness is only the beginning, and without the next step, it can actually make things worse, because you begin to see your patterns clearly without having any idea how to change them. What actually creates change at this level is something more specific and more demanding. It requires returning to the original scene, not to relive it, but to reinterpret it with the understanding you now have as an adult. There is a practice in trauma-informed therapy called narrative reconstruction. The premise is that our earliest emotionally significant memories are stored not just as events, but as fixed meanings. You did not simply experience your parents arguing about money, you experienced it, and in that same moment, your brain assigned a meaning to it. Money destroys relationships, or there is never enough for people like us, or wanting things is dangerous. That meaning became the lens through which every subsequent financial experience was filtered and interpreted, and it has been operating mostly invisibly ever since. Narrative reconstruction is the process of returning to that original moment and asking a fundamentally different question. Not what happened, but what was actually happening that I did not have the capacity to understand at the time. A parent who was consumed by financial anxiety was not teaching you that the world is a dangerous place. They were a person struggling with their own inherited programming, almost certainly passed down from their own childhood, which they had never been given the tools to examine. A household where money was never discussed was not teaching you that financial matters are shameful. It was run by adults who had never been shown how to have those conversations either. When you can see the origin of a belief clearly, the meaning it carries begins to shift. And when the meaning shifts, the automatic response it was powering begins to lose its grip on your behavior. What this looks like in your life right now. These patterns do not live in the abstract.
They show up in specific, traceable moments that most people have learned to explain away with simpler stories about themselves. If you find that you consistently reach a certain income level and then, through a sequence of decisions that seem unrelated, end up back where you started, you may be experiencing what psychologists call an upper limit problem. Your nervous system has a set point for how much financial stability it can tolerate before it begins to feel unfamiliar and therefore unsafe. When you exceed that threshold, old strategies activate to return you to the familiar. This is not self-sabotage in the dramatic sense. It is the nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do, maintaining a state it recognizes as home, even when that state is no longer serving you. If you feel a disproportionate guilt when spending on yourself but have no trouble spending on others, your childhood may have taught you, directly or indirectly, that your own needs were secondary, that spending on yourself was somehow selfish, indulgent, or unsafe. And if you find yourself avoiding your finances entirely, not because you are lazy, but because something in you genuinely does not want to look, your nervous system may have learned that engaging with money means encountering something painful, so it protects you the only way it knows, by keeping you away from it. None of these are character flaws. Every single one of them is a logical, adaptive response to an early environment. The problem is not who you are. The problem is that the environment that created these responses no longer exists, and the responses have not been updated to reflect that.
The question nobody asks. Most people spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, trying to fix their financial behavior without ever asking the question that would actually explain it. Not how do I save more, not why can't I stop overspending, but something that goes deeper than both of those. What did money mean in the house I grew up in, and who taught me to feel that way about it? Because here is what is both difficult and quietly liberating to accept. Your current relationship with money is not entirely yours. It was given to you. Built by people who were themselves operating from patterns they had inherited, in a context that no longer exists, responding to pressures that were never meant to become your instructions for how to live. The discipline is not the problem. The budget is not the problem. The income is not the problem. The problem is that you have been trying to build a new financial life on top of an old emotional foundation. And those two things have been in quiet, constant conflict ever since. Understanding where that foundation came from will not fix everything immediately, but it does something that no spreadsheet, no financial plan, and no productivity system can do. It makes your behavior make sense. And when your behavior makes sense, you can finally begin to change it at the level where it actually lives, not in your habits, in your history. The shift. The people who genuinely transform their relationship with money do not do it by finding more willpower. They do it by finding more clarity. They start to notice the exact moment a financial decision stops being rational and starts being emotional. They learn to pause and ask, is this choice coming from who I am now or from what I learned to believe when I was 8 years old and the world felt uncertain? That pause, that single moment of distinction between an old response and a conscious choice, is where everything begins to change. You are not your childhood's financial programming. You absorbed it, you were shaped by it, but you are not it. And the most important financial decision you will ever make has nothing to do with which account to open or how much to invest each month. It is the decision to stop letting a child's survival strategy run an adult's financial life. That decision does not require perfection. It does not require that you understand every pattern at once. It only requires that you begin to look honestly at the instructions you were given and ask yourself for the first time whether you actually want to keep following them. Before you close this video, I want to leave you with one question. Not to answer right now, just to sit with. Think about the house you grew up in and ask yourself, what was the feeling in the room when money came up? Not the words that were said, the feeling, the atmosphere, the thing nobody named, but everyone felt.
Because whatever that feeling was, there's a very good chance it is still somewhere in the room every time you open your banking app, every time you negotiate your salary, every time you decide whether you deserve something you want. If something in this video connected with something you have never quite been able to put into words before, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments, what is one money belief you grew up with that you have only recently started to question? Because sometimes naming it out loud for the first time is the moment it stops owning you.